Welcome to Web3 and Whiskey, a podcast about how the decentralized internet will change our lives. In each episode, we react to a future when users and communities have all of the power and when digital lives could be as vibrant as real life. And we drink whiskey while we're doing it. I'm your host, Gary Liu, and as always, I'm joined by Suresh Balaji, founder of the Web3 Marketing Association, and Malcolm Ong, a product leader and serial entrepreneur. We also have our producer, Disco Wolf, or as we call him, D-Dubs, here to fact-check us and judge our opinions. If D-Dubs likes what we say, you will hear... If he dislikes our opinion, you will hear... He's been very kind over the course of the last few episodes and only dinged our opinions and no bad buzzes, but let's see how today's conversation goes. Quick disclaimer. We don't shill projects in this podcast, so consider any excitement that you hear from us to be personal opinion. And our opinions should never be taken as investment advice of any kind. Gentlemen, it's good to see all of you again today. Suresh, where are you coming from today or recording from today?
Hey, I'm in sweet Singapore, filled with sunshine and some clouds once in a while. But Singapore is turning into sort of one of the key Web3 centers on the planet. And there isn't a day when I haven't spoken to or met somebody who's talking about blockchain, digital assets, Web3. Fascinating what's going on. Unfortunately, I'm not here till token 2049, but I'm definitely meeting some folks at Web3 Matters and a few other things. So exciting place to be right now, Gary.
Yeah, the next week or so, Singapore is going to be buzzing. There's Token 2049, as you mentioned. I think Milken's happening. Obviously, F1 is the Grand Prix is going to be in Singapore in the coming weekend. So yeah, lots of people descending on the Lion City for discussion, conversation, and some good fellowship and networking. All right. Now today's topic: what if someone leaves their entire wealth as NFTs in their will? We'll talk about why we want to address this topic and dig into it later. But as we do every episode, we're going to start with whiskeys. So, gentlemen, what do we have today? Malcolm, we'll start with you. What are you drinking today?
Today, I got this single malt scotch from the Isle of Jura. It's a whiskey that's aged in white oak ex-bourbon barrel, also then finished with sherry cask. A little bit smoky on the nose, a little bit citrusy, but tastes very smooth, and you get that sherry sweetness and a faint smoke finish as well. Quite easy.
Very nice. Malcolm, that background looks like it's a blackboard, so I really want to believe that you're sitting in like a primary school classroom just drinking whiskey by yourself.
That is my secret hobby.
Suresh, what about you? What has Singapore got to offer?
Man, I'm in the middle of my workday here, so I'm not sipping on whiskey, but I did go to a friend's place, and he kindly offered me Oban 14 yesterday. It's one of my favorites. Yeah, again, I think it's definitely. I think there is a sherry cask somewhere there. I think if I remember right, I think they finish up in a sherry cask. Oban's still a very small distillery, though owned by Diageo. They maintain quality, produce, etc. But I'm just sipping on some tea. I might get a bad buzz.
Nice. Just it's a strong tea.
Yeah. Fermented.
Speaking of Diageo, what I've got here is also a Diageo distillery. It's called Kleinlesch. Now, a lot of people who are probably casual whiskey drinkers may not have seen this bottle before, because Kleinlesch single malt whiskeys are usually used in Johnnie Walker blends most frequently, or most one known, I think, is the gold blend, the gold label blend. Diageo started producing these independent bottles from the distilleries that they own that go into their Johnnie Walker blends with these animals and sometimes flowers on the labels. So even though they are not technically a single collection of whiskeys, they have now become known as the Flora and Fauna collection from Diageo. This was a pet name given to this collection by a very famous whiskey writer by the name of Michael Jackson. Very easy whiskey writer name to remember. But Kleinlesch is, it's a classic Speyside. It's bottled at 46% ABV, so a very, very easy drink. There's not much done to it. It's very slightly floral, on the nose, definitely mossy on the taste. So just like a great Speyside, it's about the cleanliness of the water. The finish actually isn't very long, but you definitely get a warmth, a little bit of dryness. So it's not super sweet on the tongue. So a wonderful whiskey for, as Suresh puts it, a work afternoon. Don't tell anyone. But yeah, cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Glad to be joining you again this week. Cheers.
Cheers.
Before we get to our main discussion, let's get some reactions to the news. D-Dubs, what do you have for us this week?
I've got a lot for you today. The SEC made two big claims about Ether in a week. First, they claimed that all of Ethereum falls under US jurisdiction because transactions are validated by nodes that are mainly in the United States. Separately, the SEC's chairman said Ether's new staking model after the merge could potentially make it a security. Malcolm.
Yeah, so this sort of stems from a suit that the SEC filed against crypto influencer Ian Bellina. He got sued for basically a 2018 ICO that he was promoting. It's an initial coin offering. Now, it's common for SEC to file these suits under tons of unregistered ICOs. It's happened many, many times the last few years. But the interesting part is that they had this one clause, right, that basically said that the jurisdiction for this was in the US. And specifically claiming, and I quote, because they're clustered more densely in the United States than any other country, the nodes that are used to validate these transactions, right? So they basically claim that because these nodes for Ethereum are mostly in the US, and therefore it falls into US jurisdiction. I think that's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit of a stretch, very unreasonable to claim that because of that, the entire Ethereum network is therefore, under US purview. But it's just one person, maybe. It's just this one case, maybe. But very interesting nonetheless.
Malcolm, I have a better one for you, right? Apparently a third of Ethereum sits on AWS. Now, the question is, AWS is an Amazon company. Amazon is the primary jurisdiction is the United States. So you could go down the value chain of where do, not just the nodes, but where does the computation happen? And then you could go down the path. But the context also is sort of globalization is going through a tumultuous time, right? There's so many conversations, even the Web 2, Web 1 world. There are so many unknowns in the world of cloud. Data center regulation, regulatory developments on multi-jurisdictional data centers, data from one jurisdiction that sits in another, customers of one jurisdiction, data of one set of customers sitting in another. All of this is still quite unknown. So there are going to be lots of regulatory developments, and this is just a starting point.
Suresh, is this a good or bad regulatory development?
I don't know, I think.
Does it worry you? Is this a step that you're like, okay, let's see how this plays out, but maybe it could be a step in the wrong direction?
So it's still unknown. It doesn't worry me because I think, I have always maintained, more conversations, the better. The only question is, how will this get, implemented? And where do you find, how do you hold bad actors responsible? To Malcolm's point, somebody had to hold a bad actor responsible. And that's always a good thing. Now, how do they do it is where it'll all boil down to.
Okay. Man, I was hoping that this was going to be the one that starts to change Suresh's tone a little bit. You guys know what I'm going to say. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And these two developments from the SEC in just the last week are, in my mind, kind of worrying. It seems to show that the SEC or Gary Gensler, the chairman, either don't understand blockchain and crypto or are purposefully obfuscating the details to bring global crypto underneath SEC jurisdiction. I agree with Malcolm, the assessment that because the majority of nodes are run from the United States, therefore the entire Ethereum network is under US jurisdiction, should worry everyone that cares about decentralization, should worry all investors and builders, not only on the Ethereum network, but in general, across blockchain. Right, because my guess would be it's not just Ethereum. The vast majority of nodes, period, of the computational hash power resides in US or on servers that belong to American companies. So in this sense, right, if somehow this lawsuit becomes precedent that this claim that Ethereum is under US jurisdiction with the whole network, then my guess is that pretty much all of blockchain will be under US jurisdiction. And by the way, that means that China's blockchains become really, really interesting. But on the other side of it, right, this claim by Gary Gensler that the staking model, the fact that Ethereum is now POS instead of proof of work after the merge, makes it, I mean, almost definitively in his words, a security, is kind of counter to what legislators in the United States are starting to say. So in the previous podcast, we've spoken about this Gillibrand-Loomis virtual assets bill. It's a consumer protection bill, but at the same time, it also wants to carve out a space for innovation in the United States. This bill that will be part of the congressional schedule for next year is really interesting, and I think actually quite. It's a breath of fresh air because they are saying virtual assets are different. They've created or introduced this idea of the ancillary asset, just so that crypto is not just arbitrarily lumped in as securities or currencies. Whereas in this situation, just because of staking, and in fact, I guess what Gary Gensler means is that when you stake, you get the interest payments. So maybe to him that looks like a dividend. And because that looks like a dividend, therefore he says it's a securities contract. That claim, I think, is a stretch. That kind of denies the application of these tokens, and why there is a kind of a return mechanism, right? It's because you're being paid for offering up your tokens for the sake of consensus, and that is being completely ignored if the SEC just says, hey, this looks like a dividend and therefore this must be a security. Again, not enough details have come out to Suresh's point. It's going to continue to develop, but I'm worried about these two specific assessments and judgments, or what should I say? I don't know what to call them. These two specific opinions coming out of the SEC, especially when you kind of, partner that up with what the White House said and that we talked about in last week's podcast.
So Gary, in your view, are tokens securities, commodities, or currency?
I think they're a completely different asset class. And I think that's why this new bill by two different senators is really interesting by saying virtual assets are different. This is why I think Dubai is very interesting, because Dubai has set up a completely different regulatory body to govern virtual assets because they also consider it to be different.
In potentially more uplifting news, Colorado residents can now use crypto to pay their taxes. The state is the first in the US to accept Bitcoin for tax payments.
You said uplifting news, and I agree. Kudos to them for wanting to experiment. I'm a mass adoption maximalist, right? Every little will help in mass adoption, and it has to come and in some way. And it will come with learning, successes, failures. They may fail and get it totally wrong, but what really matters is that they're trying, and this will lead to more wallets. It might lead to more people thinking, hey, how does this work? And it might lead to better customer protection, better usage, right? So well done.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Suresh here. I like the fact that Colorado experimenting, but at the same time, I think this is a little bit of marketing and PR because they're not actually technically accepting crypto. They're allowing the taxpayer to start the transaction using crypto because they've decided to adopt PayPal. But the state still receives fiat. So it's not like if Colorado suddenly has a treasury where they're holding onto crypto, which, by the way, that would be really, really interesting. This PR marketing makes sense for Denver. Denver has been a secondary tech hub in the United States for the last 10 years. And especially during COVID, it has grown as a tech hub. Denver is a beautiful, incredible city, and there are plenty of talent that have decided during COVID to move there because they want to live there, right? Now that we can kind of work from anywhere, they've moved there. So Denver is growing, and Denver's tech scene is growing, and they're trying to attract crypto talent, right? To the point where this governor and other candidates have accepted crypto for fundraising in the past. So I do think that this is probably a little bit more marketing and PR, trying to attract talent into Denver and into Colorado. But at the end of the day, it's still a good move. Anything that pushes us towards wider acceptance and the normalization of crypto is good. And frankly speaking, most people aren't going to know the details. They're going to hear, oh, Colorado accepts crypto, therefore crypto must be consumer safe, blah, blah, blah. They're not going to look into the details and realize that Colorado is still taking taxes by fiat, and somebody else is clearing the crypto for them.
Yeah, you make marketing and PR sound like some flaky thing. It's science.
I'm saying it's good. I'm saying that's always the first step, right, to having the world accept new things. So Suresh, to you and your peers, marketing and PR are so important. I would never dare to suggest otherwise.
I think he said it was just marketing and PR. Keyword just. No, I think Gary's absolutely correct. I agree. Like, even if they're not technically accepting crypto, it's just great to see states like Colorado legitimizing it. It's great for adoption. It encourages more mainstream, audience, especially for something like tax, of course, right? It's going to reach the masses. It's going to reach the mainstream audience. So it's just great that they're really encouraging this. Very few states have, right? So they're one of the first. And certainly the things that are happening, on the federal level are a lot slower. I did find interesting that they actually hired, I think they're one of the first states to actually hire a chief blockchain architect. I don't know what that means or why they need one, but interesting that they did. But Gary, as you say, Denver and Colorado as a whole definitely becoming more of a tech hub. I mean, they host one of the largest Ethereum conferences, ETH Denver. So that's huge. And it's also interesting that Governor Polis, he's starting to accept crypto for campaign contributions, right? So he's using it to fundraise, and he's even selling NFTs to also fundraise. So again, kudos to them. I agree. I think this is a good move. One side note here, I thought it's interesting that PayPal was involved here. Maybe a little bit of a growth hack for PayPal that's trying to revive their brand name a little bit and be hip and cool.
It's good PR and good marketing. Number 3, A16Z is leading a $51.5 million round for a Web3 fraud protection startup called Sardine. The idea is to determine the user's risk using data like browser fingerprints and user identities across credit agencies and banks.
I have to admit, I don't know too much about Sardine, besides the fact that I don't think it's a great name. Maybe what they're trying to go for is that it's a canned solution. But I will say, any infrastructure that makes onboarding into Web3 and the crypto world easier is great. And onboarding into this world is going to long-term require lots of KYC and AML. There are just, because of the anonymity, frankly, of the networks, of blockchain networks, there are just too many ways for bad actors, as Suresh would put it, to manipulate the system, to do bad things on the network. And so KYC and AML is going to be critical for making crypto widely accepted and therefore scale. So if Sardine helps that by providing intelligent KYC and AML solutions that banks can plug into, that custodial solutions can plug into, that consumer platforms can plug into, so that somebody else takes on the risk assessment of individuals, that's a great thing. It makes it much, much easier for people to adopt crypto as a payment system, to adopt wallets as an identity system. So I like it. I don't know too many details, but in general, I like it.
Yeah, I think fraud prevention obviously is an important component to any system, including financial infrastructure, and especially in new systems like crypto. I think what's interesting here is that, though, being able to marry on-chain data with off-chain data and with what they already have available gives us then that richer data set to level up existing fraud models. But not only fraud models, right? You can imagine that this can be useful, and there's a lot of use cases outside of only fraud, whether it's insurance, whether it's other types of models. I think that's where it gets really interesting. So certainly any startup that's helping to connect both Web2 data and Web3 data certainly very needed. And so I think this is very interesting.
I agree, right, Malcolm? I think in this podcast, in the last few episodes, we've spoken about the gaps in the world of Web3, right? Web3 is not here yet. It's being developed. And these are the component parts of it. When businesses transition from one generation of the internet to the next, there needs to be industry bodies that come together to create solutions that, state-led solutions don't exist. And I think, in the absence of a clear state-led customer protection, these companies will pop up and create solutions. It's like the early days of credit bureaus, right? Most of the credit bureaus, even today, are private and consortium-based. And eventually, they will get integrated to become some sort of quasi-government body so that they can retain impartiality, be connected to the legal system, be connected to the entire legal framework of the state nation, etc. So, well done, great start. I don't know what their geographical jurisdiction is. Again, given the fact that going back to the first conversation we had about the SEC, the question will be, is Sardine global? Are they looking at US only customers? How will they build this? How will they connect up to which banking regulator? All of that is a question mark.
4. Nasdaq starts a crypto custody service for institutional clients in its first big crypto push.
This is huge, right? Nasdaq's the second largest stock exchange. This is a big step forward, I think, for legitimizing crypto for the mainstream. And in particular, they're going after custody service, which has been one of the biggest hurdles for institutions and institutional money, at scale to really operate in this space. So I think, again, very, very good for the industry, a much needed service and a much good step in the right direction.
I think, Gary, you should introduce the NASDAQ to the Colorado government so that they can accept crypto and hold custody. So somewhere, this is what's stopping them, right? So I think this needs a separate episode in my view. Talking about institutional custody or custody of digital assets in itself, probably we need a big deep dive.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. This is really big. We're going to talk about individual custody of virtual assets. Institutional custody is a whole nother can of worms. But this does allow crypto to be seen as more liquid, right? There are other major financial institutions also moving into the custody space. BlackRock has done so and is now offering custody to some of their clients. And Barclays just invested in a huge custody solution as well. So I think that this is a step one of clearly a multi-step plan, but we're not sure what NASDAQ has planned for the future. So step two for NASDAQ could be allowing trading of crypto directly through the NASDAQ. They might be actually building a direct competitor to Coinbase or Binance that serves institutional investors better. Or it could be that they could be using crypto as an actual, as capital for trading of traditional equities as well. Either way, whichever way they move, it's going to be a huge boon to liquidity, especially if crypto becomes part of the overall NASDAQ ecosystem. So cool step. And we have to watch this very closely.
Final item of the week. South Korean prosecutors asked the Interpol to issue a red notice for Do Kwon, who has tweeted that he is not on the run.
I saw a meme that was like a movie poster, okay? It said, "Catch Me If You Can, Part 2. It had Do Kwon, and it said, starring Do Caprio. So, as I told you chaps in the previous recording, I think there's an awesome movie here.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who to believe. The fact that the South Koreans are asking Interpol to issue the red notice. Wasn't Do in South Korea? And everyone knew where he lived. In fact, that's why he had to hire a bunch of security because people kept going to his house and his compound. So they knew where he was for a long time. He made it very clear he was going to Singapore at some point. And now he's saying he's not on the run. So is he on the lam? Is he not? I have no idea. My guess is that he's going to end up in the UAE like the Three Arrows guys. And that'll be interesting to see whether or not the UAE starts to play ball with other jurisdictions and authorities, or if it's very quickly becomes a safe haven for crypto people who are legitimately trying to build, but also may have made some mistakes in the past.
Gary, maybe Do Kwon's the only one who's crossed over to North Korea the other way.
I highly doubt that, Suresh.
I'm just speculating here.
He's in the metaverse. That's where he is at. So for context a little bit here, for those of you who don't know Do Kwon, of course, he's the one behind Terra that had a $40 billion collapse. And so Terra and Do, based in Korea. So South Korean authorities, were investigating that. I think he did, or supposedly he did go to Singapore. I don't know, no one knows if he's still there yet. But yeah, like you said, he's very active on Twitter. He's saying he's not hiding. He's saying he's not on the run. But apparently no one can find him. So if this thing with Interpol actually goes through, the red notice, then that means that, pretty much 200 countries would be actively searching for him and to bring them to custody. Very serious stuff here.
Now, a red notice to Gary to introduce our main topic of discussion today.
All right, thanks, D-Dubs. Let's jump into our main topic. What if someone leaves their entire wealth as NFTs in their will? Now, several weeks ago, the three of us were chatting about potential topics for future podcasts. And Suresh, you brought this one up. You were compelled by it from the very beginning. Malcolm and I were like, is this interesting? Is this sort of a one-dimensional discussion? And over just a few minutes, you kind of convinced us that there are so many angles to this what if, right? So can you go through that thought process again for our listeners and compel them, right? Get them to a point where they're like, yeah, this is interesting, before we actually dive in and waste the next 20, 30 minutes of their lives.
Fair enough. I was struck by this. It was probably a moment of epiphany for me as we were, Kay and I were looking through our wills, and we refresh our wills once a couple of years. And then I thought, good Lord, I have these NFTs, and how will I leave these, for the next generation? So let's assume, right? So I have this whole stack of old world wills for everywhere that we have any sort of asset or any sort of bank account. So now let's assume that, somebody leaves their NFTs in an old world will. I'm not even sure how they will do this. Let's say that I'm owner of a BAYC, and I'll end up saying I leave my BAYC number 4372 to my children in equal proportion, right? Now, do I leave my wallet credentials in there? Do I leave the seed phrase there do I laminate it and leave it in there? Or should I leave a cold wallet with all that's associated with NFTs? And let's assume that I don't do that and I fail to do it. And these NFTs will remain unclaimed. And if the person just vanishes from the community, the owner of BAYC XXXX vanishes from the community, there is no incentive for Yuga Labs to track this person down, and they'll just see this as a non-responsive community member, probably undoxed, and just remain somewhere, and no one knows what will happen, right? How does this translate to this NFT being given to the next of the kin? Then I started thinking, wow, this begs a bigger question, saying, what if there needs to be a will as an NFT, as a smart contract, which connects to all the contracts of the NFTs that I have? But here's the thing. First things first, the will itself is just basically a paper document, right? That helps coordinates the distribution of your assets. It's essentially a legally executable written instrument that's kept in someone's safe. And there are so many points of failure here, right? Signatures can be forged, lawyers can be corrupt, wills can be lost, inheritance tax is complicated, depending on the jurisdiction. And this is probably the most inefficient but multi-billion-dollar enterprise, disorganized enterprise on the planet, right? This whole idea of will writing. And then now you add the layer of NFTs into it, it's complete chaos. So I thought, wow, what will happen if I leave my entire wealth in tokens or as NFTs in a one-page will that says, hey, all my NFTs will go to my children in equal proportion? I don't know. So help me here, guys.
All right. It is an interesting topic. So there are a number of implications if somebody ends up leaving NFTs in their will, or actually any virtual assets in the world. And I've just jotted down 5 of the big ones that I can think of. And we're going to try and address as many of these as we can in the rest of our conversation. The first one is what actually happens to crypto assets when somebody dies. And Suresh, you brought this up, right? This kind of triggered this discussion. So let's talk a little bit about what happens to crypto assets today when somebody dies. The second is, can smart contracts actually replace estate lawyers or estate law? Number three, how can wallets be taxed? And we bring this up because, of course, there are inheritance taxes all over the world. And for wills to be executed, inheritance taxes must be taken into account. Number four, what jurisdictions have authority, especially in a world where virtual assets are kind of borderless? And then finally, the volatility that we all deal with every single day in the virtual assets world. Will volatility become a problem during the execution of a will? So let's start with the first one. What happens to crypto assets today when somebody dies? Malcolm, give this a shot. If today, somebody who owns a Bored Ape or owns whatever. We don't have to keep talking about Bored Apes, but if somebody has a bunch of assets and a series of wallets and they pass away, what happens to those assets?
First of all, this is obviously new territory. The short answer is we don't know. But getting to the details here, Coinbase does have a little bit of, they do have a policy for this, but they're a little bit different. They're, of course, a centralized exchange. But if someone does pass away and, the next of kin or whoever can basically get access to Coinbase credentials to log in and therefore get access to presumably the crypto assets that are in that account. Perhaps very, very similar to a bank account, very similar to how you might recover Facebook, accounts, things like that. Beyond that, though, my assumption is that perhaps this should be treated just like anything other digital that's of value. So for example, what if you owned a highly valuable URL to your name? What if you owned a highly valuable username, like a Twitter username or some sort of handle to your name? How do those get transferred, via your will, or how do those get transferred upon, death? I would imagine that we can take crypto assets and NFT assets and treat them that way and treat them the same. Of course, I'm generalizing here and simplifying a little bit, but that's would be my guess.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between having assets in a centralized or in custodial solution versus non-custodial, right?
Yeah.
And to Suresh's point, if you have non-custodial, the only way to unlock it is with the individual has to have the password,
the keys,
right? the seed phrase. And if that's not passed down, there's nothing we can do about it, right? This is why we hear stories all the time of people losing millions of dollars of Bitcoin on hard drives that they still possess. I'm not the same as the guy who threw his hard drive out, but they still have this hard drive, but they can't access the cryptocurrencies because they have forgotten their seed phrase.
Shouldn't that be true for any digital asset right now? Assume it's outside of crypto, outside of NFTs. If presumably I had something valuable, I don't know, on a USB stick, on a CD, that's sitting in a safe deposit box, technically I should be able to write that in my will, and technically I should be able to give whoever I want access to that, right? So,
well, I think there are two differences. The first being that I can't imagine any digital asset today being worth as much as crypto assets can be worth. Fine, maybe if you have like the only copy of a extremely a great piece of music or a film like the master cut or something like that, it could be worth something. But crypto assets as a whole, just as an asset class, is just so much bigger than any other digital asset that has ever been created. The second thing is you put in a USB. There are always ways to get into that. There are ways to unlock that USB, even if you've put a password on it. And with blockchain, it's just that's as far as I understand, pretty much impossible. So So there's definitely a greater risk to having assets of great value locked on blockchain after somebody unfortunately passes versus locked in a physical digital drive.
Yeah, and this is where, to Malcolm's point, if it's a Twitter handle or a domain name, you could still go to the centralized authority who is Twitter, or you go to whoever is the domain name platform, and you go and say, hey, so and so passed away. In their will, I have a legal document that says Suresh has left his sureshbalaji.com to Gary Liu, and Gary can go claim it. It's worth him a few $1 million, right? But how will you do that? What will you do if I have to leave sureshbalaji.eth? Will ENS manage it? Will they say, sorry, we're decentralized, you should have access to that to the wallet, to Suresh's MetaMask? I don't know. How does it work?
I think if it's centralized, then you have access to that account that controls it. If it's decentralized, then presumably what you could leave in your will is simply the keys to access that thing, right? So maybe at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what that key unlocks. If I were to zoom out and generalize here a little bit, at the end of the day, I'm just leaving a key for someone, whether that's a physical key, whether that's a password, whether that's whatever it is. And so you have access to whatever that key gives you, right? So I don't think yes, there's a lot of risk in things that are a lot more valuable, but I don't think functionally it matters how much something is worth. Even if it's $1 versus $1 million, it shouldn't matter how the transfer of ownership happens.
Well, okay, I don't think we're arguing that. I think the debate is, in a decentralized world, you have to have the key, right? In a centralized world, you don't have to have the key, and a court and judge can deem it reasonable for whomever controls a centralized thing, whether it's a server or an actual physical lockbox, to go effectively drill into it, extract the assets, and then pass it on to whomever should have it. Whereas if their seed phrase is gone, right, for a wallet, a blockchain wallet, then the assets there are locked, and it's very unlikely that you'll ever be able to get access to it, because it's not even if a judge says, Gary does get all of Suresh's NFTs, but the seed phrase is gone for the wallet, then how are we going to get it?
It is funny though, right? Web3 and all of the blockchain stuff is supposed to kill the single point of failure as a core issue. And here, the seed phrase becomes the single point of failure.
Yeah, I don't know, Suresh, that it was supposed to kill the single point of failure. I think it was supposed to mitigate single point of control. And we're assuming that single point of control equals single point of failure. But it has just transferred the authority, that control, from big, gigantic corporations to individuals. And so now we individually, every single one of us, are the single point of failure. And frankly speaking, we're much more likely to fail than a large corporation.
So is that it then, where because the custody is on the individual themselves rather than some centralized entity, then we simply need more processes or better standards to determine how individuals themselves can control and transfer the ownership of these assets.
Yeah. This is somewhat akin to pirates hiding their booty, right? and then not leaving a treasure map, because they're I will always remember where I hid my stuff. And then they go ahead and get killed by Blackbeard or the British Army or whatever, the British Navy, and then their treasures are lost forever. But at least in that situation, eventually somebody might stumble on it and dig it up. And once you dig it up, you can claim it. In this scenario, we can't crack the code.
Forever.
Okay, so to Malcolm's point, maybe it is we need better systems to be able to automatically transfer, even to kind of mitigate against that individual point of failure. So, can smart contracts do that for us? Can smart contracts replace the will and replace estate lawyers or estate law? Suresh, what do you think?
Malcolm, you were telling us that your marriage certificate is an NFT. That's a legal document?
Yes.
Why can't that happen to a will?
I think it can happen to a will. Absolutely. But the question here is then, can you have a smart contract that then triggers a bunch of logic based on some event happening, right? So if a death happened, can systems automatically trigger a smart contract which would then do a bunch of business logic that transfers ownership to XYZ, effectively replacing maybe what lawyers would do, et cetera.
Yeah, because that would be, in effect, the quote-unquote perfect solution, right? That the smart contract has been written, it has been created, the logic has been created and signed off by the asset owners while they're living. And when they are certified to passed, then automatically assets get transferred. The original asset owner never has to give up their seed phrase. There doesn't have to be a will that in writing writes down their seed phrase, which, by the way, that's a point of failure we're talking about. It's a legal document, right? And you really freaking have to trust the lawyer or how the lawyer keeps these documents from exposing access to your entire life savings potentially. So if a smart contract means that you don't have to give up that seed phrase, but automatically assets get transferred when when you die to some other wallets that other people have access to, that could be perfect. But then that trigger, what kind of trigger? Like, what if somebody gets certified as dead but they're not, and then it triggers this distribution? You can't reverse that.
Mm.
You can reverse it by goodwill, but you can't actually programmatically reverse it.
Let's say that the smart contract has replaced the lawyer, and it triggers some logic. How does the smart contract know that you are no more, and it has to trigger?
Right. That's what I mean. Like that's a point of failure, right? It could be whatever. I mean, it has to be an audited system. Effectively, our health code, or our life code now needs to sit somewhere on the blockchain, so that when we do pass away, it has to be verified by some centralized authority, and then it gets effectively our life and death status has to now be recorded onto the blockchain. And then once it is verified that we are dead, and that block has been added to the end of the chain, then everything gets triggered. Yeah, I can't even start to think how to build a system or what controls would need to be instituted for a system like that to be like fail safe.
Yeah, I think first of all, it had to be exclusively, blockchain assets. I think it'd be very, 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 very hard for any smart contract to have access to other systems, that trigger, other downstream transfers of ownership. Secondly, I think there absolutely needs to be some sort of potentially third party here, right? So if it's a centralized entity that effectively determines how this trigger happens or validates that this trigger happens, like you said, maybe they're also the auditor. That's how it would necessarily be triggered, because there's so many complications of how this can go wrong, right? There's so many ways of how this could fail. And if the system is buggy, there's so many things that can happen here.
So Malcolm, let me push on that first point you made, though. I think I disagree with that. I don't agree that a smart contract cannot trigger the transfer of non-blockchain based assets. We've previously talked about a real example of a rewards program out there that replaced their internal marketing and campaign system using blockchain because it made it easier to program campaign logic and made the settlement of rewards for their customers real time, as opposed to after the campaign's done, lots of Excel spreadsheets and blah 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 blah. So in that sense, it was blockchain logic triggering the distribution of off-chain assets, in this case rewards points. So why couldn't you have smart contract logic that triggers the transfer of fiat, right, from a bank account to another?
I think just from a practical and realistic standpoint, where theoretically that's possible if everything was, online, number one, and number two, their systems had the ability to talk to each other. I think my comment is just more of my confidence level of that ever happening, right? Where every single system in the world can basically talk to each other. And so you can have this single smart contract that effectively can trigger every other system that's out there. Plus, again, assuming that everything is online, there might be a bunch of things that still require some human intervention. And if so, then that means the smart contract isn't covering 100% of your assets. Maybe they only cover 80%. $1
trillion platform. Houses, right? The deeds that we have to properties. I imagine that pretty shortly will become smart contracts. And so if we are selling houses, we could, instead of actually going through the process as it is today, it could just be a transference of a deed, right? Of a smart contract deed.
Well, one more thing though, what if it's also the other side where it's like debt? And so that would be interesting. We keep talking about valuable assets, but what about quote unquote negative assets? I wonder then if people, would in a way resist this or reject this if we actually made that part easier.
Interesting. Yeah, I imagine that the transference of debt might actually be solved first, because there's a lot more incentive to solve for debt than there is to solve for assets. Yeah, so I guess the debt that has been created so far, with the wipeout of Terra as an example, maybe that could be transferred through smart contracts. We seem to have lost Suresh, so that I don't know what's going on. Maybe we now have to deal with Suresh's will and see if I actually get that NFT that he keeps talking about, or Suresh Balaji.eth if he owns it. Well, let's keep going here. I want to talk a little bit about taxes, because I think at the end of the day, these issues, they all kind of boil down to a need for digital identity, for verifiable digital identity that authorities and individuals trust equally, and being able to tax virtual assets is becoming an increasingly large problem for governments. And inheritance tax is going to be a thing with virtual assets. So let's go back to Malcolm again. Let's talk about taxing wallets. Do you know of any jurisdiction today that actively polices the taxing of wallets? And if so, how do they do it?
Yeah, I don't know. This is a tricky one, and I think it's still in figure it out stage, especially because you have to think about all the entities that are involved. Which jurisdictions we're talking about. If I own these assets, especially if it's decentralized and not, within, say, a centralized exchange or a centralized place, who gets to decide what gets taxed, how much gets taxed, who eventually gets that tax? I think it's very, very complicated and very tricky, of course. So yeah, I really don't know how this is gonna happen.
We're going to need DID for it, right? Because the government needs to be able to know who owns these wallets. But DID is going to be something that individuals need to volunteer, because they own the identity. They should be the ones who allow it to be used. And so if governments see a wallet that has a lot of assets in it that have appreciated in value, they're going to need the individual who owns the wallet. They're going to need to trace the individual to be able to tax those assets. Suresh, your thoughts on tax?
Yeah, Gary, tax and jurisdiction are two words commonly used in the same sentence, right? So what jurisdiction do you get taxed in, and what jurisdiction is the wallet in? What jurisdiction is that human being in? Let's assume that, there is huge amount of crypto tax evasion that's happening right now, which no one's able to figure out what to do with it. And this is why, going back to our first news item on the SEC, having this conversation is just takes it back to where we started, right? The question is, there has to be, maybe, like we're talking about $1 trillion system that connects everything, maybe there is a tax code that is universal. Wouldn't it be amazing that there is a universal tax code, and everyone says this is it?
Wait, who's going to agree with you that this would be amazing? Okay, come on, Suresh. All right, let's
discuss.
Okay, you are, and I hope you don't mind me revealing this to everyone, a non-U.S. citizen, right? You're not a U.S. person, and so you are not subject to American taxes for the majority of your income.
Yeah.
Let's say that this SEC opinion that Ethereum, because the majority of the nodes sit in the United States, therefore the entire network is under U.S. jurisdiction. It is not a very large leap for them eventually to get to the fact that any revenues generated across the Ethereum network is therefore U.S. or American-derived revenues. Any transactions on the Ethereum network that creates profit is therefore American-derived revenue, and then individuals can be taxed by the United States. Because remember, even non-U.S. citizens can be taxed by the United States if they are making money under U.S. jurisdiction. So in that case, you go ahead and you are smart enough to invest in an altcoin, right? Like a really bad shit coin, and it rises 1,000, 10,000%, right? And then you sell it, and it's an ERC20 token, right? Would you be okay if the US came after you and said, hey, this was done on the Ethereum network, and therefore we get to tax your profits, your capital gains?
Well, let's forget Ethereum for a minute. Let's take Web 0 example, right? Or a Web 1 example. Let's say I go and buy. I go and invest in a startup, which is in the garage, and buy, which is in the garage in Connecticut, and I land up buying 30% of the startup. That startup does really well. It comes to Series B, and I exit my 30%, right? I make capital gains. Now, tax law will tell me that I will need to pay capital gains tax because that startup is based in Connecticut. I'll probably need to pay New York state taxes, pay federal taxes, pay all sorts of stuff. In this case, the question is whether SEC can think of Ethereum as an American product or not is a different question, right? So in this case, what I'm saying is there's a what if
scenario.
Well,
they're claiming that it is, right? They're actually claiming now that it is under American jurisdiction.
So the answer to it is not every country claiming it's in their jurisdiction. Maybe the answer to it is it's everyone's jurisdiction. Therefore, there is a global code. Web3 blockchain by design is worldwide. So you
don't think a global code is going to effectively mean an American code? That's what it's going to mean, right? And again, Malcolm and I are American citizens. We are already subject to global taxation, so it's not going to make too much of a difference for us. But for the vast majority of the world, it's going to be a thing.
This is the thing. I mean, this is what is unknown, because if there is, let's say there is inheritance tax on someone's crypto inheritance, it will have to be based in the jurisdiction where the wallet is registered as a company.
Again, I don't know. I guess that's what I mean when we're talking about DID, right?
Yeah.
Decentralized ID. That inevitably there has to be a DID solution that will hopefully keep people's assets and wallets anonymous still. They will still be able to decentrally own and control and have custody over those assets. But when authorities need to know who that wallet belongs to, they can.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think. I mean, we again a couple of weeks ago we talked about what it would take for companies to start paying the majority of their employees in just crypto, and DID, right, a doxed wallet or a wallet that can be doxed to the relevant authorities, was a necessary precursor.
I think that's a little bit different though, because if you have to pay income tax that is based on the services that you're providing, maybe to a particular company, and therefore jurisdiction is clear, right? Versus if you had assets in a decentralized wallet, even if it's a KYC'd wallet or even if it's DID, what jurisdiction has the right to register that? Why would I as a consumer want to register that DID if they're assets that are not really clear that's part of any, if they're NFTs, for example, like why should I register my DID to the US government or to any government for that matter and tell them that I own these NFTs? Is it therefore then it's like who gets to process the will and therefore under which laws and jurisdictions the will gets processed? Maybe that's the only use case there. But otherwise, I don't see a reason that any jurisdiction can say that, hey, give me access to your DID so I know what you own and therefore I know what to do with it and I know how you should be taxed. So I don't know. I think
here's another spin.
There's a tricky part, right?
So here's another spin. So we let's assume that it's Moonbirds. Proof Collective as a company are set up in the US, and maybe therefore your tax will be basis where the originating community or the community origination is.
No, that's against the entire ethos of Web3. You're centralizing it again.
So would there be inheritance tax on your NFT or not?
But maybe you can argue that, okay, maybe Proof owns, well, maybe Proof is a bad example, but I was going to say that Proof owns the IP, right? But they don't own the token that they just sold you. You own the token. And so it's not that I'm transferring IP here. maybe I'm just transferring the ownership of that particular token. So I think it's a little bit tricky here. It's much more complicated than what we see at the surface level.
We're obviously not going to get to the bottom of this. D-Dubs, we got to add a tax expert to our list of future guests to this podcast to, again, relitigate this entire issue. Before we wrap, by the way, I don't know why Suresh randomly picked Bored Ape 4372. Was there a reason you picked that number?
No, I don't know. I just
okay.
Just got random.
He secretly owns it, but
I know. Maybe. Bored Ape 4372 is an ape that has a purple background, a tank top, bored eyes, dark brown fur, and his mouth is a grin. The last offer on OpenSea for it was 72 ETH, which is around $100,000 right now. It was minted by Pranksy, sold by Pranksy to somebody for 3 ETH over a year ago, June 2021. And then since then, it's kind of been transferred from one wallet to another. It's been used to borrow money on BenDAO several times. And the actual Bored Ape itself, based on Rarity Tools, is ranked number 9851 of 10,000 Bored Apes. So it's pretty low rank. It's amongst the lowest ranked Bored Apes. But hey, still a Bored Ape. So there it is. For those of you who are wondering, Bored Ape 4372. I did the work for all of you guys. Okay, so what we've learned today is that there are no good existing solutions to deal with inheritance and wills concerning not only NFTs, but any kind of virtual asset. And we are going to need one because more and more people are going to own digital assets and they're going to be worth something real. And we're going to see cases where the vast majority of somebody's net worth will be left in these types of assets. Now, the decentralized nature of digital assets means that retrieving these assets could be very difficult. It's not just a matter of the court saying X belongs to Y, therefore it happens. If we lose the keys and the passcodes and whatnot, that may never be able to be resolved. So these assets might be forever lost. We also know that there are smart contract implications. How does that entire network work? Is there a $1 trillion network and platform that can address all of these different classes of assets and all of the triggers needed to make smart contracts viable as wills, replacing estate law and estate lawyers? We also know that there are going to be tax problems, and that we definitely can't get to the bottom of because we probably, between the three of us, we don't even know tax law well enough to know who gets taxed for what across the world. So as far as practicality is concerned, I think we agree that a smart contract can theoretically reduce the points of failure for estate law. But today, the ecosystem is just not developed enough, and there just isn't enough incentive to build the system properly. By the way, Suresh, while you were gone from the conversation, Malcolm and I came to the conclusion that the transference of debt upon someone's death might be solved before the transference of assets, because there are people incentivized to make sure that their debt gets paid out by next generation. So smart contracts can do a lot of things today. In today's real world, there's still limits. And I think that using smart contracts as wills today is one of those limits. The future is coming, though, so there's going to be a solution at some point. And maybe Malcolm, as serial entrepreneur, may be the one who builds it. Thank you, gentlemen, for another enlightening conversation. Suresh, thank you for compelling us with this what-if scenario. This has been Web3 and Whiskey. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite audio platform. And if you don't mind staring at us, go smash the like and subscribe button on YouTube. And also, please subscribe to my weekly Departures newsletter that further explores Web3 innovations and provides explainers for the enterprise world. Join us next week as we have more Web3 debates and a lot more whiskey as well. I'm Gary Liu. Thank you for listening. See you next time.